"Please, sir, my brother's still in that burning barn." The girl yelled to the riders. The flames ate through the tobacco barn like hungry animals, and May's voice cracked as she screamed at the 5 men on horseback. Orange light danced across their badges, turning the metal into flickering stars against the black smoke that choked the evening air. Her brother Danny's voice came from inside the burning structure, weaker now than it had been moments before. "Please, he's dying in there." Deputy Collins sat straight in his saddle, one hand resting on his gun belt, the other pulling a silver pocket watch from his vest. He flicked it open with his thumb and studied the face like he was timing a Sunday roast. "Can't risk our necks for a barn fire." "Girl." May clawed at the air between them, her bare feet sliding in the dirt as she moved closer to Collins' horse. The animal snorted and stepped back, but the deputy didn't even look down at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the flames. "That's my brother." "Brothers die," Collins said, snapping the watch closed. "Happens every day." The other riders shifted in their saddles but said nothing. May noticed their badges weren't like Collins' standard county star. These men wore different metal, cleaner uniforms. Strangers with guns and authority that didn't belong here. Danny's voice came again from inside the barn, calling her name, but the sound was getting swallowed by the crackling wood and collapsing beams. May ran toward the barn entrance, but Collins spurred his horse forward, cutting her off. "You take another step, girl, and you'll burn with him." "Then let me burn." Collins finally looked down at her. His face showed nothing, empty as winter sky. Behind him, the barn's roof beam gave way with a thunderous crash, sending sparks shooting up like dying stars. "Your daddy should have thought about consequences," Collins said. May's chest heaved as she stared up at him. "My daddy's been dead 2 years." Collins smiled, and it was the coldest thing May had ever seen. "Debts don't die, girl. They just get passed down." The barn groaned and settled deeper into its own fire. Danny's voice went quiet. May's fingernails scraped against the leather of Collins' stirrup as she pulled herself up, trying to reach him. Danny's screams cut off mid-word, leaving only the roar of flames and the crack of burning wood. The silence that followed felt heavier than the smoke choking her lungs. The barn's main beams snapped with a sound like gunfire. The entire structure folded inward, sending a fountain of sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. Embers rained down on May's hair and shoulders, but she didn't feel them burn. Collins swung his leg over his horse and dropped to the ground. May thought he was finally going to help, but he just stood there, straightening his vest. "You need to understand something, girl. My brother just died, and you'll join him if you start asking too many questions." May wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of ash across her cheeks. Through her tears, she could see the other riders more clearly now. Their badges weren't county-issued like Collins'. The metal was different, shinier. Their clothes were too clean for men who'd ridden hard to a fire. Their horses weren't even sweating. "You planned this." "Planned what?" "Bonfires happen." "You killed him!" Collins reached into his coat and pulled out something black and twisted. Danny's hat, burned at the edges but still recognizable. He dropped it at May's feet. "Your daddy should have paid what he owed." May stared down at the hat. "Daddy's been dead 2 years. Debts don't die, girl. They just get handed down, generation to generation, until someone pays them in full." Collins mounted his horse again. The other riders were already turning away, their job finished. May picked up Danny's hat and held it against her chest. "What did my daddy owe?" But Collins was already riding away, and his words came back to her on the wind. Everything. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, leaving May alone with the dying fire and the weight of questions that felt too dangerous to ask. May didn't knock. She slammed through the sheriff's office door hard enough to rattle the glass, Danny's burned hat still clutched in her fist. Sheriff Briggs looked up from his desk, where he sat across from a man in an expensive suit. "May, what in the hell are you doing?" "I want answers about my brother." The man in the suit closed a leather briefcase that bulged with papers. Property deeds spilled from the edges, more than May had ever seen in one place. The man's name tag read, "Morrison County Assessor." "Sheriff Briggs was just telling me about the unfortunate barn fire," Morrison said, his voice smooth as riverstones. "Tragic accident." That wasn't no accident. Briggs stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Careful, May. Accidents happen to girls who don't listen. May's eyes moved to Morrison's vest. Pinned next to his county badge were 3 smaller ones, the same unfamiliar metal she'd seen on Colin's riders. Different shapes, but the same clean shine that didn't belong in this dusty county office. Is that a threat? Morrison smiled and Briggs nodded once, barely a movement at all, but May caught it. The 2 men understood each other perfectly. It's a promise. Morrison stood and gathered his briefcase, papers rustling. Sheriff, I trust you'll handle this matter appropriately. The county has invested too much in progress to let rumors spread. You killed my brother for land. I didn't kill anyone. Morrison walked to the door, then paused. But land is worth more than lives around here. Always has been. He left, and Briggs sat back down. May stared at the sheriff she'd known since childhood, the man who used to give her candy from his desk drawer. How long have you been working with them? Working with who, May? There's nobody here but us. But May had seen the badges. She'd seen the look that passed between them. She'd seen Morrison's briefcase full of deeds from families who'd lost everything to accidents and misfortune. Danny knew, didn't he? That's why they killed him. Briggs reached for his gun. Belt May walked the dirt road to the Hartwell place. As the sun burned low behind the hills, Mrs. Hartwell answered the door in a black dress that looked like it hadn't been off her body since the funeral. Her kitchen smelled of bitter coffee and something deeper, something that might have been grief turned sour. Heard about Danny, Mrs. Hartwell said, pouring coffee into chipped cups. Heard it was an accident, same kind of accident that killed your husband. Mrs. Hartwell's hand trembled as she set down the pot. Tom died when his tractor rolled. That's what they said. What do you say? The widow walked to an old cabinet and pulled out a drawer that came free completely. Underneath, May could see papers stuffed into a hidden space. Letters with Morrison's county seal pressed into expensive wax. They killed my husband for 40 acres. May picked up one of the letters. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. Sell or face consequences. The signature was Morrison's, but the letterhead belonged to something called Frontier Development Corporation. They killed Danny for nothing. No. Mrs. Hartwell's daughter Lucy appeared in the doorway. The girl was maybe 17, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and felt too little. They killed him for everything. Lucy sat down at the table and stared at May with the kind of hollow rage that felt familiar. May recognized it because she carried the same weight in her own chest. How many families? May asked. 12 in the past year, Lucy said. All accidents. All men who wouldn't sell. Mrs. Hartwell poured herself coffee with hands that had stopped shaking. Morrison comes to the funerals. Says how sorry he is. Then he comes back a week later with papers for the widows to sign. And if they don't sign... More accidents, Lucy said. Happens to children next. May folded the letters and put them in her coat pocket. The coffee tasted like ashes, but she drank it anyway. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like something trying to get in. May returned to the barn ruins when the moon was high enough to light her way through the ash and debris. The smell of burned wood still hung in the air like a funeral shroud. She kicked through the rubble where Danny's room used to be, looking for anything that might have survived the flames. Her boot hit something solid. Danny's journal, the leather cover blackened but intact, was buried under a fallen beam. May pulled it free and opened it to the last entry, dated the day he died. Morrison's been forging tax liens. Found the real deeds in his office. The Hartwells never owed a penny. Neither did the Caseys or the Millers. He's been stealing land and killing anyone who figures it out. Going to show May tomorrow. May flipped back through the pages, reading Danny's careful handwriting, documenting months of investigation. Fake documents, bribes, a list of 12 families marked for removal. But when she looked up from the journal and then back down, new words had appeared on the page. They're coming for you next, May. Danny? Are you? She looked around the burned foundation, but she was alone. When she turned back to the journal, more words were there. Written in Danny's familiar scrawl, he's gone. May, but his anger isn't. May's hands shook as she watched the ink-form letters on the page. Impossible but real. Trauma could make the mind see things that weren't there, but the words felt true in a way that cut through her confusion. Then we use it. The pages fluttered in a wind that didn't exist anywhere else. More writing appeared, faster now, Danny's anger flowing through ink and paper like blood through veins. Find the real deeds. Morrison keeps them in his house. Basement safe. Combination is Lucy's birthday. He killed her father for sport. May closed the journal and held it against her chest. Dead brothers didn't write, but living sisters could finish what they started. The moon cast her shadow long across the ruins, and for a moment it looked like two people standing in the ash. May knocked on the Hartwell door before dawn. Danny's journal tucked under her arm. Mrs. Hartwell answered in her funeral dress, but her eyes had changed overnight. The grief was still there, but it had hardened into something sharper. "Lucy's already awake," Mrs. Hartwell said. "She's been hearing her father's voice since midnight." They found Lucy in the kitchen, staring at an empty chair where her father used to sit. The girl looked up when May entered, and her face was streaked with tears that seemed to appear and disappear without reason. "He keeps telling me to be careful," Lucy whispered. May opened Danny's journal and showed them the new entries that kept appearing. Words of warning, lists of names, details about Morrison's operation that Danny couldn't have known when he was alive. Mrs. Hartwell read over May's shoulder, her breath catching. "The Casey widow lives 2 miles north," Mrs. Hartwell said. "We start there." They spent the morning visiting grieving families, and each house brought new strangeness. At the Casey place, shadows moved in rooms where no one stood. At the Miller farm, they heard children laughing in empty barns. The widow Rodriguez swore she could smell her husband's tobacco pipe every night at 9 o'clock. "It's the grief," May said as they walked between houses. "Makes us see things. Or maybe the dead don't rest when they're murdered," Lucy replied. By evening they had testimonies from 5 widows, all telling the same story. Threatening letters. Accidents that weren't accidents, pressure to sell land that had been in families for generations. May wrote everything down in Danny's journal, and the dead man's handwriting seemed to guide her pen. They sat in Mrs. Hartwell's kitchen as the sun died, planning their next move. Morrison was holding a public land auction at the courthouse tomorrow, selling property from families who could no longer work their farms. "You think they'll believe us?" Lucy asked. May closed the journal and looked at both women. "They don't have to believe us. They just have to fear us. What if we lose?" Mrs. Hartwell smiled, and it was colder than a winter wind. "Then we take them with us." The courthouse steps were packed with people May had known her whole life. Morrison stood at a podium, gavel in hand, selling off the Casey farm to the highest bidder. May pushed through the crowd. Danny's journal clutched against her chest. "Sold to Frontier Development Corporation for $800, Morrison announced. "That land's worth $10,000, May shouted. The crowd turned to stare. Morrison's smile faltered when he saw her. Sheriff Briggs moved toward May, but she was already climbing the courthouse steps. "This auction is illegal." May opened the journal and began reading. June 15th. Morrison forged the Casey tax lien. June 20th. Morrison bribed the assessor to triple the Miller property value. "Get her out of here," Morrison said to Briggs, but May kept reading and the crowd kept listening. Names, dates, amounts. A systematic plan to steal land from families who'd worked it for generations. Morrison's hired guns appeared from the crowd, moving toward May with hands on their weapons. Mrs. Hartwell stepped forward and screamed, "They killed my husband!" Lucy threw herself at one of the gunmen, clawing at his face. "Murderers!" In the chaos, May faced Sheriff Briggs directly. "You killed my brother." "Prove it." May held up the journal, its pages fluttering in wind that seemed to come from nowhere. "I don't have to." "They will." "Who?" "Everyone you buried." Morrison tried to push through the crowd, heading for the courthouse back entrance. May followed him inside, past the holding cells, and down the narrow stairs to the basement records room. Morrison stumbled in the darkness, knocking over boxes of files. "You can't prove anything," he gasped. But the basement wasn't empty anymore. May could hear them too now, whispers rising from the corners where shadows gathered. Voices calling Morrison's name, listing his crimes, demanding justice. Tom Hartwell's voice, the Casey father's voice. Danny's voice stronger than the rest. Morrison pressed his hands to his ears, but the voices grew louder. "Stop it! Stop it!" "They won't stop," May said, stepping closer. "Dead men don't rest until their killers pay." Morrison looked at her with wild eyes. "I can hear them." "Good. Now everyone else will too." The basement door opened behind them. Sheriff Briggs appeared with his gun drawn, but the voices had already won. Morrison sat in the courthouse jail cell, rocking back and forth with his hands pressed to his ears. The federal agents who'd driven down from the state capitol watched him through the bars as he confessed to crimes they hadn't even asked about yet. "Tom Hartwell, I pushed his tractor off the ridge. Made it look like an accident. Danny Pierce, I had Collins' men burn him alive in that barn. The Casey boy, poison in his well water. How many others?" Agent Williams asked. 12 families, maybe more. They won't stop talking. All of them telling me what I did wrong. Sheriff Briggs sat in the corner, his badge and gun already confiscated. The federal investigation would take months, but his career was over. May watched through the window as they led him away in handcuffs, finally paying for the crimes he'd helped cover up. 3 weeks later, May stood in the field where the barn used to be. The ash had settled into the soil, and green shoots were already pushing through the black earth. She knelt down and pressed wildflower seeds into the dirt, one handful at a time. Mrs. Hartwell and Lucy walked across the field, carrying watering cans and more seed packets. The older woman had taken off her funeral dress finally, and Lucy's eyes had lost their hollow look. "Is it over?" Lucy asked, kneeling beside May. May looked around the field that would stay in her family now, the land that Danny had died protecting. The phantom voices had gone quiet after Morrison's arrest. No more impossible journal entries, no more shadows moving in empty rooms. The dying is. The living starts now. Mrs. Hartwell scattered seeds in wide arcs, her movements sure and steady. "What kind of flowers are these?" "Danny's favorites. He used to pick them for our mother when she was sick." Lucy smiled, and it was the first real joy May had seen in her face since they'd met. Danny would have liked that. May pressed her hands into the soil and felt something settle in her chest, a piece she hadn't known was missing. Some ghosts needed justice to find rest. Some land needed to be fought for to stay home.